Chapter 18. Tavern Humor. Not every room in the fortress is built for war, judgment, or strategy. Some exist simply so the walls don't collapse under the weight of seriousness. The tavern is one of those places. Inside the fortress, it's small and low-ceilinged, warm in a way the rest of the structure isn't. Lantern light instead of firelight. Rough wooden tables carved with old jokes, bad puns, half-finished thoughts. It smells like smoke, ink, and laughter that shouldn't exist, but does anyway. But this place doesn't just exist inside. This is one of the few rooms that opens directly onto the external world. When Danny is joking, when he's being witty, when he's deflecting with humor, when he's laughing things off, laughing with people, or laughing at himself, that's the tavern, bleeding outward. On the outside, people experience it as his sense of humor. On the inside, it's a pressure valve. Because a dragon who never releases pressure eventually burns everything. This room exists for one primary function: release without consequence. The humor here isn't polite. It isn't curated. It isn't always safe. It can be dark, twisted, crude, clever, childish, or accidentally brilliant. Some jokes land, some miss spectacularly, some make people recoil, some make Danny laugh so hard he surprises himself. And that's the point. Dragon humor is sharp and observational. Capricorn humor is dry, intelligent, and relentless. Combine the two, and you get comedy that cuts, exposes, exaggerates, and dismantles, sometimes before anyone realizes what just happened. Inside the tavern, you'll find the usual patrons: amusement, slouched in a chair, half drunk on timing; sarcasm, parked at the bar, sometimes razor sharp and devastatingly on point, other times too drunk to bother standing up at all; irony, smiling quietly at the absurdity of it all; absurdity, saying things purely to see what breaks; relief, laughing a little too hard; deflection, quick with a joke when things get uncomfortable; disassociation, grateful for the noise; self-mockery, a regular at the bar; and shame, laughing along so it doesn't have to speak. These aren't here to solve anything. They're here to keep things moving. On the external, this is why Danny jokes in awkward moments, why he cracks one-liners when conversations get heavy, why he sometimes laughs when others think he shouldn't, why humor shows up before anger, before sadness, before silence. It's not cruelty. It's not dismissal. It's navigation. Humor becomes a language, one that lets him circle pain without naming it, poke holes in authority, mock systems, mock power, mock himself, and remind everyone, including himself, that nothing is so sacred it can't be laughed at. This is also why humor sometimes gets him into trouble. The tavern doesn't filter for taste. It filters for relief. Sometimes the joke lands wrong. Sometimes it offends. Sometimes he doesn't know when to stop. That's the risk of using humor as a defense mechanism. It works too well, too fast, and sometimes without permission. But inside the tavern, it's understood. This is where awkwardness goes to die, where tension is mocked into submission, where embarrassment is dismantled piece by piece, where authority is reduced to something human-sized. This is where Danny reminds himself, and others when they're allowed in, that not everything needs to be heavy to be real. The dragon laughs here, at the world, at people, at systems, at absurdity, at himself most of all. Because a dragon who cannot laugh becomes a tyrant. And a Capricorn mind without humor calcifies into something cold and joyless. So the tavern stays open. Not everyone likes it. Not everyone understands it. Some walk in once and never come back. Some mistake armor for cruelty. But for those who can laugh with him, who understand that humor here isn't avoidance but survival, this place feels familiar. Because not every truth needs a courtroom. Not every conflict needs a battlefield. Some things just need to be laughed at, hard, loud, and without apology. The tavern exists because even inside the fortress, the weight can become unbearable. The court argues, the battlefields burn, the war room plans, the tower isolates, and sometimes even internally, it's too much. This is where Danny goes when the gravity of everything else needs to be escaped, not confronted. Humor here isn't denial, it's relief. It's how grief is held without collapsing under it. How anger is bled off before it turns destructive. How awkwardness on the external is softened, redirected, laughed into something manageable. This room is the emotional equivalent of cracking a window in a sealed space. Inside the tavern, Danny can step away from judgment, strategy, identity, and consequence. He doesn't have to win. He doesn't have to explain. He doesn't have to be right. He just has to laugh. Internally, this place is a refuge, a hiding spot, a breathing space, a pause button. He can sit there and replay moments that once made him laugh, not just jokes, but memories. A look someone gave, a ridiculous situation, a stupid comment that landed perfectly. The kind of laughter that sneaks up on you when you didn't think you were allowed to feel light anymore. Externally, this is when people see him alive. When Danny is joking, smiling, quick-witted, playful, or rolling through puns and dad jokes like they're second nature, he's here. When he's relaxed enough to be silly, when he's sharp enough to improvise, when he's on a roll and feels almost like a performer. That's not accidental. That's what happens when he's not fighting, like defending or analyzing, but recovering. Humor becomes the bridge between internal survival and external connection. It allows him to stay present with people without opening doors he isn't ready to open. It lets him engage without bleeding. It keeps things human when everything else feels sharp. This is also why humor often shows up in moments of discomfort. When conversations edge toward grief, when silence stretches too long, when emotions hover too close to something raw. The tavern opens its doors. A joke lands, a quip deflects, a laugh interrupts the spiral. It's not that Danny doesn't feel deeply, it's that he feels too deeply. And this is how he survives that without drowning. This is where he laughs at the world so the world doesn't crush him, where he laughs with people to stay connected, and where he laughs at himself so ego doesn't harden into something brittle. Humor here isn't shallow, it's earned. It's the sound of someone who has seen too much, felt too much, and decided that laughter is still worth keeping. Because in a fortress built for survival, the tavern exists for one reason: to remind the dragon that joy, even dark, awkward, stupid joy, is still allowed. This is also the place where Danny can sit at a table with anger, sadness, and joy all at once, and let them talk without letting any one of them take over. Anger cracks jokes sharp enough to bite. Sadness laughs softly, almost apologetically. Joy laughs loud, stupid, and without permission. And Danny listens to all three. Here, pain doesn't need to be dissected. It can be laughed through. He can mock someone with spite when they've earned it. He can laugh at someone when judgment is safer than engagement. He can turn the joke inward, see himself clearly, realize he's being ridiculous, and let it go. Sometimes the laughter is cruel. Sometimes it's self-deprecating. Sometimes it's pure relief. But it always does the same thing. It loosens the grip. In this room, anger doesn't have to burn. Sadness doesn't have to collapse the floor. Joy doesn't have to justify itself. They sit, they drink, they talk shit, they exaggerate, they distort, they parody the situation until it's small enough to carry. And that's the point. Because not every wound needs a verdict. Not every feeling needs analysis. Not every situation deserves the weight of the court or the fury of the battlefield. Some things just need to be laughed at until they lose their power. Danny sees the funny side. He laughs it off. It's also a clever kind of camouflage. This place exists because some emotions are too corrosive to sit with in silence. Shame, embarrassment, humiliation, exposure. The kinds of feelings that don't just hurt but linger. The ones that replay. The ones that whisper you should have known better. So instead of letting those emotions rot in the dark, Danny drags them into the light and laughs at them. He turns humiliation into a punchline before it can turn into self-loathing. He turns embarrassment into exaggeration until it loses its teeth. He turns shame sideways, distorts it, mocks it, shrinks it, until it's something he can hold without flinching. That's not avoidance. That's survival intelligence. Because when you've lived enough lives inside one lifetime, worn enough masks, failed enough times, loved and lost and rebuilt and burned bridges behind you, the weight stacks fast. Any normal person might have collapsed under it. Gone quiet, gone numb, gone under. Danny didn't escape depression. He built rooms around it. And when the dragon is down, when the fire is low, the wings are heavy, the battlefield still smoldering behind him, this is one of the few places he can still go without being asked to explain himself. Depressed Danny finds the tavern safe, because even at his lowest, the ability to laugh, even darkly, even bitterly, even questionably, is proof that something inside him is still alive. That twisted humor, that's not cruelty. That's a spark. A reminder that the dragon hasn't gone out, that the fire hasn't died, it's just learned how to flicker instead of roar. Here, laughter isn't denial, it's defiance, a way of saying, I'm still here. I can still see the absurdity. I can still make light bend around pain instead of letting pain crush me. And that's why this tavern matters. Because even when everything else feels heavy, the court, the wars, the scars, this is the place that quietly proves the dragon hasn't lost his sense of self. He can still laugh. He can still joke. He can still sit with anger, sadness, and joy at the same table and let the punchline land. And sometimes on the external, you can see it happening. You'll notice the dark, morbid humor surfacing when sadness is close, jokes that make people uncomfortable, laughter that sounds a little too sharp for the moment. That's grief talking sideways, trying to breathe without collapsing. You'll notice the twisted, judgmental, sassy edge when anger is present, not full fury, but sarcasm with teeth. Observations that cut, wit that doesn't apologize. That's anger sitting at the bar, half drunk, deciding whether it can be bothered to stand up. And then there are the light puns, the dad jokes, the groan-worthy wordplay that slip out when joy gets a seat. Simple, stupid, harmless things that exist just to make the moment lighter. Not deep, not clever, just warm. Most people don't consciously clock it. They just think that's his humor. But what they're really seeing is which part of him is currently holding the mug. That's also why Danny can enjoy such wildly different kinds of comedy. Dark stand-up, dry wit, absurd nonsense, cheap puns, offensive jokes, clever wordplay. It all lands somewhere because every part of him is present in that tavern, each one laughing for a different reason. Humor here is not a cure. It doesn't wash away sadness. It doesn't resolve grief. It doesn't teach anger a better way. It doesn't elevate joy into purity. It doesn't fix anything. What it does is make it bearable. It lets sadness exhale without turning into silence. It lets anger vent without becoming violence. It lets joy exist without pretending the rest isn't there. Everything passes through the same filter. Morbid, sarcastic, witty, self-aware. Because that's the only way all of it can coexist without tearing him apart. So when Danny laughs, it's never just laughter. It's grief choosing to speak instead of choke. It's anger choosing wit instead of fists. It's joy choosing irony instead of naivety. It's the dragon, bruised and tired, still finding a way to keep the fire alive, not by burning the world, but by smiling at the absurdity of surviving it. And that's why the tavern never closes. Because as long as he can still laugh, even like this, the dragon is still breathing. The tavern isn't lawless. That's the mistake people make when they only see it from the outside. Yes, it's loud. Yes, it's dark. Yes, the jokes can be brutal, morbid, tasteless, and cutting. But it isn't unsafe because there are bouncers here. They don't wear uniforms. They don't shout. They don't announce themselves. They listen. When something is said, internally or externally, and it's framed as humor, the tavern is where it gets weighed. And the moment someone follows a remark with, "I was only joking," a different set of figures stir. These aren't comedians. They're safeguards. Discernment is always leaning against the bar, arms crossed, unimpressed. Boundary stands near the door, quiet but immovable. Moral disgust doesn't laugh. It watches faces. Pattern recognition remembers who said what before and how often they hide behind humor. Protective anger sits on a stool, relaxed, until it isn't. Integrity nurses a drink slowly, waiting to see if the joke punches up or down. Empathy for others, not softness but principle, decides whether laughter would make someone else smaller. These parts know the difference between dark humor and disguised contempt. They know when a joke is shared with people and when it's aimed at them. So when someone on the external crosses a line and then tries to laugh it off, the tavern doesn't excuse it just because the Crimson Court has passed it down as humor. The bouncers intercept it. That's not a joke. That's a tell. That's a red flag. And that's when anger stands up. Not blind rage. Not battlefield fury. Not dragon fire. This is principled anger, the kind that doesn't need escalation to be effective, because Danny has never had a problem calling that out. Racism, sexism, casual cruelty, bigotry wrapped in irony, humor that punches down and then hides behind banter. That doesn't get laughed off. It gets stopped. Externally, this is the moment people experience him as blunt, sharp, uncomfortable, unamused. Internally, it's the tavern doing its job, because this place exists to let him laugh, not to let others smuggle harm in through the side door. Dark humor is allowed here. Cruelty pretending to be humor isn't. That's the line. And the bouncers don't debate it. They just quietly decide whether you're still welcome at the bar or whether it's time for you to leave. And sometimes, not often but deliberately, the king leaves the throne room. You'll feel it before you see it. The tavern doesn't go quiet. It doesn't freeze. The laughter doesn't stop, but it shifts. The air tightens just enough for everyone inside to know presence has entered. The ego doesn't come here to drink, he comes to observe. This is Danny, externally, when the humor is flowing, laughing, joking, bantering, being self-deprecating, being sharp, being quick. But it's also Danny internally, stepping into the tavern to make sure the laughter stays useful, not corrosive. Because laughing at yourself is one thing, letting yourself be dismantled is another. And the king does not allow the latter. He never arrives alone. At his sides are the king's guard, not soldiers, not warlords, but sentinels of identity. Self-respect walks just behind him, silent but immovable. Pride is there, not arrogance, but the spine that says know who you are. Dignity keeps watch over tone and balance. Self-preservation scans for moments where humor turns into self-harm. And moral center, quiet, steady, makes sure laughter doesn't erode values. Their job isn't to stop jokes, it's to stop self-betrayal. Because humor, unchecked, can become a blade turned inward. And Danny knows that. Somewhere deep down, the system knows that. That's why when jokes start circling too close to humiliation, when mockery becomes habitual, when laughter starts feeding shame, the king steps in. Sometimes externally this looks like him suddenly changing tone. Sometimes it looks like him drawing a line. Sometimes it's a sharp look. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's walking away. Internally, it's the ego saying, enough. The presence of the king in the tavern doesn't kill the mood, it anchors it. It reminds everyone there that humor is a tool, not an identity. That wit is armor, not a coffin. That being funny is not the same as being disposable. And when the king is satisfied, when laughter has done its job, when the tension has eased without tearing something vital, he leaves just as quietly as he arrived. Back to the throne room, back to watching, back to ruling. The tavern carries on, but it remembers. Because even in laughter, especially in laughter, the dragon does not forget who he is, and nor does the lunar ghost. She is present here too, because she has to be. Humor matters too much to Danny for her not to be. The tavern is where edges show, where timing slips, where people reveal whether their humor is a shield, a weapon, a kindness, or a mask, and the lunar ghost needs to see all of it. The dark, the morbid, the absurd, the childish, the stupid, the clever, the inappropriate, the innocent. She doesn't have to find everything funny, but she has to understand it. She has to recognize when humor is release, when it's deflection, when it's grief trying to breathe, when it's anger trying to soften itself, when it's joy bubbling up in spite of everything else. She has to be able to tell the difference between a joke that heals and a joke that wounds, without flinching at either. Because this is not a courtroom echo. This is not a battlefield resonance. The echo here vibrates differently. It doesn't calm. It doesn't warn. It doesn't judge. It coaxes. It pulls Danny out of the heavy, brooding, guarded dragon state and into something looser. Silly, playful, ridiculous. It invites the side of him that makes bad puns, stupid dad jokes, exaggerated faces, timing errors, and laughs at his own jokes before anyone else gets the chance. If she cannot meet him here, if she cannot laugh with him, tease him, be teased back, be ridiculous without fear, then she isn't the lunar ghost. Because this place tests something essential. Not intelligence, not strength, not resilience, sync. She needs to get his humor, not just tolerate it. And he needs to get hers, not just humor it. They don't need identical jokes. They need shared rhythm, the ability to volley nonsense back and forth, to laugh at each other without cruelty, to laugh with each other without performance. And more than that, her presence in the tavern changes the room. When she's there, the bar knows. No one turns her into the punchline. No one heckles. No one tests boundaries for sport. If anything, the energy shifts to something almost reverent, like a comedian spotting someone in the crowd they genuinely want to impress, not dominate. The jokes sharpen. The timing tightens. The intent cleans itself up without being told to, because she isn't there to be entertained. She's there to witness. And this is the place where Danny and the lunar ghost need to be able to laugh together and at each other without it costing either of them anything. If they can't do that, then whatever it isn't home. And she is also his biggest critic, not the kind that wounds, the kind that knows exactly where to press and does it with a grin. She's one of the comedians in the room, sharp, playful, merciless in the best way, and somehow she never trips a single safeguard. She doesn't provoke anger. She doesn't stir resentment. She doesn't wake pride or shame or any of the bouncers at the bar. She can poke that dragon all day long, take the piss out of him relentlessly, dismantle him joke by joke, and he'll laugh with her. Even when others would think she's humiliating him, it isn't that to him, and it isn't that from her. Because there's no cruelty in it, no power play, no attempt to dominate or diminish. It's intimacy disguised as mockery, a language only they share. She knows exactly how far is too far, and she never crosses it. Not because she's careful, but because the line doesn't exist for her. With anyone else, dignity and self-respect have to be guarded, protected, enforced. With her, they're irrelevant. Not because she takes them, but because what he feels for her sits so far above them that they don't even enter the equation. He doesn't need to defend himself. He doesn't need to posture. He doesn't need to be the dragon. He gets to be pure, loose, unarmored, ridiculous, and she gets to be the same. That's why the tavern matters, because this is where they prove they can have fun together, without masks, without fear, without anyone losing themselves in the process. At a psychological level, the tavern is not a luxury, it's load-bearing. For a dragon Capricorn mind that runs hot, sharp, dominant, and relentlessly analytical, pressure doesn't dissipate on its own. It accumulates. A schizophrenic architecture like Danny's doesn't get silence, it gets traffic. Voices, instincts, memories, reactions, past selves, future projections, all moving at once. Without a release valve, that kind of system collapses inward. The tavern exists because fire needs laughter or it turns to ash. From a dragon lens, humor is dominance without violence. It's a way to stand tall without drawing blood, to win without escalating, to mock chaos instead of letting it rule. Dragons don't just burn, they taunt, they grin, they laugh at the idea of being defeated. That's ancient, predatory confidence. From a Capricorn lens, humor is control, timing, restraint, precision, knowing when to joke and when not to, knowing which joke lands and which one costs you ground. The tavern is not random noise, it's curated material, tested lines, observed reactions, data collected through laughter. From a schizophrenic lens, it's integration. This is where anger, sadness, joy, shame, embarrassment, nostalgia, confidence, and grief can sit at the same table without tearing the room apart. They don't need to resolve anything here. They don't need verdicts. They just need to exist together without consequence. That's why depressed Danny finds this place survivable. That's why anxious Danny hides here. That's why angry Danny vents here before he burns something down. Even when the dragon is wounded, even when the sun is dimmed, the tavern keeps a spark alive. Dark, twisted, questionable sometimes, but alive. Externally, this is why Danny jokes when things are heavy, why he laughs at himself, why he reaches for comedy before comfort, why he'll choose a funny film over a dramatic one, a witty line over a heartfelt speech, a ridiculous pun over silence. It's not avoidance, it's regulation. And it's not that he finds everything funny. He doesn't. A joke still has to work. If it doesn't land, it doesn't enter the tavern. It gets redirected to the maze or the library. Humor, like everything else in his fortress, is filtered. Because this isn't about being funny. It's about staying functional. The tavern is where the dragon remembers he's still human, where the Capricorn loosens his grip, where the schizophrenic mind finds a rare moment of shared laughter instead of internal argument. It's where the system breathes. And as long as that place exists, as long as he can still laugh, even darkly, even quietly, the dragon hasn't fallen. He's just resting at the bar.